Hi guys, so thanks for coming for the quick panel. I think what we wanted to do after Jane's fantastic talk is to set a context for the rest of the whole SME track. For the audience perspective, this is the first time in our FinTech Festival history that we have an entire track just dedicated for SMEs. So we wanted to set the tone. Why are we focusing on SMEs? Why are SMEs important? There are over 400 million SMEs in the world. They're all struggling to make their dreams come true. How can they be better connected? How can BsB initiative, which with all our partners here, make that be a reality? So let's go back to basics itself. I think the first question we're going to answer, and I think that's where we'll reach out to them, is what are the challenges that SMEs currently face? What kind of issues do they need to sort of overcome? And I think I'll reach out first to Ari. He's heavily involved in the payment space, and they have huge initiatives in India and other countries itself.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Eugene. I think we're delighted to be here. Yeah. And SMEs, if you really look at just across most economies, they are a fundamental backbone of all economies. You know, anywhere between 40, 50, 60%, you'll find that the SMEs drive employment. They are really the economic engine for most countries. What is also interesting is that, you know, for a global platform company like ours, and what do I mean by a global platform company? You know, we are basically bringing aggregation of consumers, merchants, and businesses. We have over 2.6 billion consumers, and we touch over 60 million physical merchant points globally. And then there are obviously tens of thousands of other e-commerce players in the digital world that we're enabling. And I think what we are able to do and really see the opportunity for SMEs is digital technology and e-commerce is really creating barriers to entry are increasingly coming down. And you can see it with marketplaces, whether it's the eBay marketplace, whether it's many others. You've got the Flipkarts, the Amazon, the others that have come up, Lazada here in Southeast Asia. You're increasingly finding that technology is enabling SMEs to get access to either consumers or suppliers in a much more significant way than they've ever done. And I think that's creating a really exciting opportunity. And BsB is looking to raise that to that next level, where you're really going to provide aggregation and an opportunity for SMEs to really collaborate in a cross-border sense, both from finding new consumers or also finding new suppliers. And I think that's really exciting for us. And we'll talk a little bit more about the challenges that SMEs have in that journey and how many of us sitting here are looking to solve for some of those challenges in the years ahead.
And I think the key point you brought about is how technology is a key differentiator that allows SMEs to leapfrog. I mean, Rachel, your SAP as a global entity, you have a lot of experience how that can be a major game changer. Could you just share a bit more?
Absolutely. So happy to be here with you all today. And I think one of the really fantastic things about SAP is we're really focused at helping organizations run better and improve their business processes, whether they're large organizations or small organizations of any size. And I think that's the really important thing that I really wanted to raise today is that, you know, in just the ASEAN countries, we have over 8,000 organizations using SAP technology. And I think when you think about it, most people think that SAP is more for large enterprise. But that's why we really wanted to get involved in the BsB program, because we have very unique expertise in business process and very unique technology and networks that we can expose small, medium enterprise to and actually help to accelerate growth. Because I think just as you said, one of the key barriers to SMEs is cost and regulatory environment, and how do we help SMEs to take the great goods and services that they're producing today and expose them out to the larger global environment. And if there are ways that we can help to leverage our technology to do that and our networks, we have, you know, over 190 countries transacting on our Ariba network. That is a massive gateway for SMEs, and we can't wait to be a part of it.
Yeah, and I think one part of BsB is how do we go from different countries and connect them together. One major country I think we're looking at is India itself. They have a lot of challenges itself. And I think Samir, from your perspective, you're doing great work in India, connecting different SMEs. Could you just want to jump a bit? How do you utilize what you guys did and make it so simple for SMEs?
Sure. So I think a couple of points in the opening. One, we do refer to them as small and medium enterprises, but as an SME ourselves, as an organization, we are a small business today. I can tell you that their dreams for their business is anything but small or medium. Yeah. Each one harbors a very, very large dream. And it's incumbent on us as players in this market, playing our different roles to help them realize those business dreams. On our part, we've set up an ecosystem, a platform that digitizes and connects SMEs. And I think Richard did talk about earlier also, there were discussions about the power of many and the ability to connect small businesses, allow them to find opportunities within themselves, but provide them an environment within which that can be done is really, in a sense, the responsibility of what we can all collectively do. And I think that's really where Business Sans Borders plays a great complementary role to that extent. Just stepping back in terms of the Indian market, specifically, though we operate in multiple markets globally, we today have about close to 300,000 SMEs from 154 countries, 5,900 cities on Global Linker. But India being the concentration, you're exactly right. I think there is a lot of leapfrogging that requires to be done, especially in markets where the regulations kind of still evolving in some ways, and a lot of the infrastructure support is coming together. I think their ability to leapfrog by digitizing their operations is critical, and that's really what is extremely exciting about Business Sans Borders. And this morning we heard on the big stage about the 70 million SMEs that are getting digitized, and the fact that Business Sans Borders is going to be able to allow them wider connectivity into the global market, I think is extremely exciting.
Yeah. Anything about connectivity, let's bring it back home to Singapore itself. I think what's unique about BsB as an initiative, it involves both public and private partnership. On the private aspect, let's move over to Tiong Yi from the Singapore SMEs perspective. I think it's quite unique because Singapore itself isn't a major producer. We don't really move markets in terms of prices. But I think in terms of services, we are quite strong. So maybe you could share just a bit.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I guess most of you are probably thinking, isn't Yellow Pages dead? No, we're not. So 3 fun facts to start off. Yellow Pages Singapore is started in Singapore in 1967. So we are 52 years old, probably older than most of you guys here. Second fun fact, we killed the book 2.5 years ago. And people miss us. People miss us when they're looking for a door stopper. People miss us when they're looking for a stand for their computer. I heard that the police station where they're interrogating suspects were looking for a Yellow Pages. I don't know what to use with it though. Anyway, jokes aside, Yellow Pages, we work with SMEs for many years, and we serve a segment that is very often ignored by a lot of businesses. We call it the S of the SME, the micro SME. So those will be a mom and pop shop, small SMEs, and you look at them, they have very specific challenges. If you ask them what they want, 3 things. They want leads, how to increase the revenue. They want to look at how can they reduce costs. And third, how can they get funding? So very, very common problem for all these 3. So we have found a way to actually serve this segment of SMEs very effectively, and they need a lot of hand-holding. Many businesses use self-serve, because there's so many of them. We actually serve SME directly. They need hand-holding, and they need people to guide them through the technology because most of them can't understand it. I'll give you an example, right? I was talking to a mooncake lady. She sells mooncake, 30 years old in Singapore, very, very old, and in Bedok. So those of you who are in Singapore, you know a very famous mooncake shop in Bedok. That's our customer. She asked me, how can I go digital? Very traditional business. And how can I increase my revenue? So when I told her about BsB, she was all excited. Says, now you can sell mooncake all over the world. So she's really looking forward to that.
Thanks very much for the very personal story. Now I'll give the most difficult question to my colleague here, Robert, from IMDA. It might be some of your questions' minds. Why is this initiative driven by government? What's government's involvement? And why Singapore? So Robert, do you want to take it?
So when this initiative started, it was a combination of 2 agencies working together, MES and IMDA. And I think we both come from it from very different perspectives, but both with the same common objective. I think the badge sums it up. We love SMEs. MES is coming from a financial inclusion perspective. How can they enable SMEs to have financial inclusion for SMEs? And ultimately, that's going to come from having more data about SMEs and more data about SME trades, which will make those SMEs visible to the potential funders. IMDA is coming from a digitalization angle, and I think one thing that's very clear is neither of us can achieve our objectives on our own. This is clearly going to be a public-private partnership. With all the resources that we have, there's no way that we're going to reach every type of SME. The example you gave of a mooncake seller, different SMEs are going to need different roads to digitalization. Some will be handheld, some will be self-serve. Different SMEs will have different challenges. And there's not going to be a one-size-fit-all solution for all of these SMEs. So then, if you're not going to have a one-size-fit-all solution, how are they all going to connect once they have digitalized in their own small circles? And that's where BsB really is trying to do something different. We recognize that the power of digitalization stays within the individual platforms, the companies, our partners who digitalize individual groups of SMEs. But ultimately, if they're all spread out in their own small groups, they're not going to be able to talk. So what we did with BsB is really say, now that we've got this digitalization happening in pockets, how do we connect them? And Singapore's a small place, so even if we connected them all across Singapore, we're not really doing them a service. The real value that comes in connecting is actually connecting internationally. So we're delighted to have partners in India, partners in Philippines, and as we move further along into phase 2, we're looking for partners all over the world. And that's where we really will see the growth. We'll really see the growth when we start to connect SMEs. I think a line that was used earlier today was, can we create corridors of SMEs and corridors of SMEs that connect? And that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah. So I think you've all shared, everyone's affirmed, I think, their interest in the concept of BsB, but let's move to reality. How do we take a concept itself and make it a reality over the next couple of years? I mean, starting an initiative, starting a new platform is always a challenge. Effectively, for those you are trying to grasp what BsB is, it's almost in a nutshell creating a SWIFT of all SMEs or internet of SMEs. So they're easily connected, they can find each other and do trade directly. You guys have massive experience, I mean, all across the table, of building platforms from the ground up. What would you see are the key success factors just to make this high concept a working reality, not just for all organizations, but also for the SMEs that are within the crowd? How can they connect and what do they need to look out for? Maybe we'll start in reverse order. So Ari, on your end, from India, it's a massive country.
Sorry.
Sorry. Samir, on your end.
We look alike. Yeah.
We do.
I don't mind being called Ari. You have to check with him. Okay. On our part, I think the way we can demonstrate the value of Business Sans Borders is through the effect of what we have built in a collaborative sense. So just to spell that out, each of our organizations have tried to contribute in specific ways by building certain blocks and components of this. So speaking for ourselves, we've contributed through the building of a sandbox where any organization, and in the audience, if there are organizations who are, say, logistics providers services or payroll services, HRMS, any of those services that SMEs can consume, you could come to a sandbox built by BsB, where we've played a certain role, get yourself registered, look at a bulletin board, see what discussions or requirements seem to be there from ecosystems who are participating in Business Sans Borders, build out your solutions, test them out using APIs, and once that test is done, you will be able to access SMEs of several ecosystems, current and future, on Business Sans Borders, and therefore have market access for your products in a simplified way. Now, that's the BsB side of it, where we play one role. On the other side, as an ecosystem, what we have as a responsibility is to show our SMEs greater value. Tongi talked about giving them more demand opportunities for their products, finding more suppliers, etc. And that becomes integral to the way BsB operates. So in a very pragmatic sense, I think using components, one as an ecosystem player, finding more opportunities of buyers and sellers with the AI-led matchmaking that BsB would be providing. And second, using the sandbox capability to offer your products and services to several SMEs across the world without having to expend either the time, effort, or money is really a huge pragmatic and practical value of what BsB brings on that part. So,
thanks a lot for sharing. And I guess for the Singapore context, we are quite well digitalized. What's the delta that BsB could bring? I mean, we're already quite connected as a sort of digital entrepot to some extent. I mean, Robert and Tongi, what are your views on, I mean, how much impact could BsB bring to this current connectivity our SMEs already have?
Well, I guess a lot of SMEs do not have the expertise to actually expand within. They can do it within Singapore, but going outside Singapore, I think most of them find it a problem. So if you ask me about the key success factor that we need to do to ensure that the BsB take off, for us at least, is to very quickly demonstrate success, very, very quickly, build skill, have a lot of suppliers as well as demand, both supply and demand, we got to have skill. And third part, make it frictionless, both from the government as well as the tools and the platform that we're going to deploy.
From a success factor, I think you've got to start with the right ingredients. And I think the heart of BsB is really the SME. So you've got to look at why you're doing what you're doing. And I think the role and importance of SMEs really gives us the correct foundation and starting point. You layer on top of that the technology that's brought together by our key partners, and you're starting to build on that foundation. If you're doing it for the right purpose, with the right technology, then success is hopefully more certain than not, but not necessarily guaranteed. You throw in government to actually help drive that, to carry that messaging, to bring that education piece down, and then hopefully you can really make an impact. So I think success for us will be determined by making sure that we stay on message, that we're delivering the right value to the right people, that we're constantly using the right technology to do that. Whether it's BsB or whether it's some other morphed form that actually ends up, if we're doing the right thing for the right group of people and bringing them to the right opportunities, then actually success, whether it's BsB or another platform delivering this, is actually what's more important. What's more important is our end beneficiaries.
And I just want to reach out to our big partners from SAP and MasterCard. I mean, you guys run global organizations. Just starting an initiative from ground up, there's many challenges you have to tackle, both from the ground level to big buyers. I know when you talk to governments, of course, they're always a joy to work with. So things like, how do you prioritize my domestic industries? How do you prioritize financial inclusion, female entrepreneurs? I mean, how do you juggle all these competing interests to create something ambitious as BsB, which is intended to be a global initiative, and customize yet a solution which is relatable to each different country or each different sector in different countries?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I guess one of the things I'd say is it all comes down to value at the end of the day. Yeah. Why do people decide to join in a group? It's because the group is going to give them more value than being by themselves. And I think that one of the things I'm really proud of is that I actually, in the early 2000s, was at the ground floor when Ariba was starting to build the network. And today, Ariba does more B2B commerce than any of the global marketplaces actually combined. We do over $3.3 trillion of commerce on the network every year. That started in the early 2000s with zero, okay? And so that's a story that I think that we can bring forward and really help bringing our experience, is how do you start from zero and go to over 4.2 million suppliers on the network? And I'd say that it really starts in two phases. The first is being agile and understanding and listening to the market about what they need. The Ariba network actually started because it was to try to help connect buyers and suppliers to digitize just purchase orders, okay? But then taking a step forward from that, you know, that grew to a certain stage. But then Ariba, once it was acquired by SAP, took a infinite leap forward, because it's about enabling end-to-end business processes. Because if you just enable one part of the cycle, you're missing a tremendous amount of value. And you really need to understand that a small, medium enterprise, they have to think about the full cycle. So if you just take care of one piece, you're missing all of this value, and it becomes really hard for the SME to adopt to the network or to the BsB concept. So those would be the two things that I think are going to be really important, but it's also why I'm so excited to have an opportunity to be a part of it.
So Eugene, from our perspective, you know, we really look for adjacencies either in market spaces that we operate in, or we look at fit of our existing technologies that we can deploy in different new use cases. So in the case of BsB, you know, we are acutely aware of the challenges of SMEs in a global context, where identity of an SME, whether the SME has bona fide credentials, do they meet regulatory requirements of KYC and others? You know, when you trade from one country to another, it's very difficult to know whether this is a legitimate business or is this just a front which very significant amounts of fraud happen in today's so-called digital world. And I think our interest really is bringing our identity, KYC, and authentication credentials to the SME space. And here I must talk about a program called MasterCard Track. It's a platform that we've built. Over 240 million SMEs globally are onboarded for authenticated credentials. And that's very similar, the expertise we want to bring into BsB, where whatever gets on the BsB platform, either you're a buyer or a seller, you should be confident about the credentials of the entity that you're really going to deal with. That coupled with our learnings from what we call retail, consumer retail payment space, we have, if you really look at how trade works, it is really fraught with many challenges, heavy paperwork. It is a manual process. There isn't a whole lot of digitization and documentation. Payments, to have small businesses go through letters of credit and lengthy discussions and costly, process of getting paid. We think we're bringing a new set of capability in the BsB, which is tried and tested in the consumer space, tried and tested in many marketplace spaces where we use what we call a virtual card credentials, which means your ability to send and receive money is dramatically increased at a fraction of the cost than what traditional paper-based processes have actually delivered. So I think these are some of the big enablers that's really got us excited that we can be a big catalyst for improving trade between SMEs in a cross-border sense.
I think issues like trust, responsiveness, ease of connectivity, these are all key to make it very intuitive for the SME to pick up. I think that's what BsB is trying to achieve through the partnership with you guys. And then just before we have limited time left, before we close up, 5 years from now, assuming everything is a resounding success, how do you guys foresee, how does this relate to the SME? How would their lives be changed? How would business be reimagined? How would trust reimagined from your perspective? Trading, whether they're within different cities, within the country, or even globally. Either one of you can just start chiming in here.
I guess one thing that I'd say is that it's all about experience. And one of the things that we're really focused on is understanding people's experience. I can't tell you what it's going to be 5 years from now, because I think we need to listen to all the constituents in the marketplace. We need to listen to the buyers. We need to listen to the sellers. We need to listen to all the SMEs. We need to listen to the large enterprises that want to come in. And I think that's one of the things that we're really passionate and focused about right now is how do we actually really listen across all aspects of a value chain and continue to be agile and evolve and understand how we need to change and how BsB may need to change to add really unique differentiating value moving forward.
Adding to that, I think from five years from now, I think what would be nice to see is that some of the issues we're talking about have been simplified to the point that they're no longer even issues. There will be new issues that we need to talk about in 5 years' time. Again, I agree with Rachel, we won't know what they are. But some of the aspects of it, hopefully we can take for granted digitalization. It's like you pick up a phone. I think the example given in the green room was you pick up a phone, you go anywhere in the world, that phone works, you can still make a call. All that is taken for granted. You move on to the next issue.
Right.
I think for businesses, simplification of the current day's issues would be the greatest achievement. Of course, there'll be new issues which you need to find, and I think if you can find the right partners to get to work on those new issues and simplify them as we move forward, I think simplify what we know now and engage what we don't moving forward.
Okay, I'll take a step at this. If you look at Yellow Pages through the years, one of the strengths we have is that we have communities. We have 140,000 SME in our database, and we're proud that we can build communities. And you look at marketplace, the strength is about community. Why? Because community trust each other. So coming back to operational work is trust, but the trust is within the local community. So 5 years from now, if BsB is successful, we want to have the ability to communicate, to have communities growing to a global community. That means communities connecting to community from the different countries. So that over time, the trust become global. So that the community worldwide under a particular identity can trade among each other, trust each other, and be able to do everything frictionlessly.
Well, from my perspective, I'm actually with Rachel. I'd rarely crystal ball what 5 years from now would look like. I think what we really do is, keep a very nimble approach to things, the ability to change and adapt is critical for companies, particularly in the technology space. However, I think, Eugene, my views are that even before you think of 5 years, there are some fundamental challenges in the near term for BsB has to tackle. And this has got to do with things like cross-border data sharing. What do you do with government policy? This has to the network effect of BsB, and therefore scale and success can only be measured when more countries and more SMEs come onto the platform. And I think that brings you to privacy requirements, and different countries are looking at this and I must say, in a variety of ways. Until you don't bring some kind of formalized structure to that debate, where you're going to address some of this in a manner that helps facilitate global trade, I think you're going to end up with a bunch of digital islands because the rules framework, the governance framework aren't necessarily aligned. And that would be the death knell for what seems to be a really attractive opportunity for small businesses to collaborate. And I really feel that there's a lot of work to be done in the interim period beyond just the BsB team, but at a broader level between regulators in a cross-border sense to get some clarity on these bigger questions.
So I'll take a departure from that and look into the crystal ball for a moment and say 5 years later, but I'm going to hedge my risk by banking on a statement that was made this morning, which said that India is going to be a 5 trillion economy. And if it's going to be a 5 trillion economy and SMEs are going to be 50% of that, which is 2.5 trillion, sitting at 0.7 trillion today, you're growing close to fourfold in 5 years with the same number of SMEs. Now, if that first prediction of India being 5 trillion and SMEs being 50% of that is considered to be true, in our crystal ball it comes back saying yes, confirmed, then we know that there has to be a change that has to happen. I would look forward and say BsB has probably played a small part or some part in enabling that growth, that leapfrog to go there, because that's only going to happen when the SMEs are completely digitized, are not looking at local businesses. SMEs start by looking at neighborhoods. They look at within the city, they look at within the state. You need not be that way today. With the infrastructure, with the services, with all of us combining forces, an SME need not think restricted. And if that is the case, my crystal ball tells me BsB has a role to play in India as one country, but several other countries through the cross-border trade corridors we've been talking about. So that's my little hedged sort of look into the crystal ball.
Thanks, everyone, for taking the step in 5 years. I think that's a valiant effort, because I think most of us aren't sure what's happening next week. But I think to Ari's point and to some of the Rachel's point also, I think it's very key that we are very agile. At the same time, we are cognizant of the macro view of how governments play. I think and you guys can attest to it, how BsB is run is almost like a startup. We're very large companies, but we're almost run at a startup basis. We are very responsive to feedback, and we're always talking to people to understand what their needs are.
And very optimal on funding.
Yes, very optimal on funding. But in terms of engagement, and that's why it's a public-private engagement, the Singapore government is also very much behind this. I think you have seen a lot of ministers and so forth visiting the booth. If you guys are free, just a quick pitch before the end of the festival today. We are available still at Hall 3. But what we're trying to convey is that the Singapore government is very much behind this, because we recognize that to solve the SME issue, to make SMEs connected, is not just a private sector issue. I think governments need to be heavily involved, and a lot of conversations that our team, so Robert and I, are involved in, involved with Indian government itself, involved with Philippine governments, and I think we have interest from other governments. How do we sort of break down the barriers? How do we make it easier for businesses, SMEs to do business on a regulatory basis, on cross-border funds flow, on trust basis, which is very key. So I think these are all very interesting conversations, which I feel if we can crack, we not just help what we're trying to achieve in terms of BsB, we help larger issues also. For cross-border trade, to uplift the basic incomes of SMEs, to uplift the connectivity of SMEs themselves. I think that's all the time we have. We have run out of time. So if you guys have any questions, please approach any of us. I think everyone is very excited about this. And thank you for your time. I'm sitting here.
Thank you.